The alarm sounds while the room is still dim, the light outside undecided, neither night nor morning yet. A hand reaches out and stops the sound without urgency. There is no rush to sit up. The ceiling looks familiar. The air feels unchanged. For a moment, nothing is required. This is how most days begin, already in motion but not yet demanding anything. The body moves through what it knows. Feet touch the floor. The floor is cool. The window holds a quiet rectangle of early light. The mind drifts ahead, not to anything dramatic, just to the usual list that will shape the hours. Things to handle. Things that could wait. Waiting has a way of settling into the background like furniture. It does not announce itself. It simply occupies space. Not now, it suggests, later will be better. The suggestion feels reasonable. It almost always does. Coffee brews. The day starts to make small sounds. Outside, other lives are beginning in their own ordinary ways. None of this feels like a decision. It feels like continuation. Yesterday leading calmly into today. Somewhere beneath the routine, there is a quieter awareness that comes and goes. It does not interrupt. It does not insist. It observes. The sense that days pass whether they are noticed or not. The sense that time is not waiting for clarity before it moves on. Most people do not consciously choose to delay their lives. Delay accumulates gently. It arrives through sensible explanations. There is more to learn first. Energy is low. The timing is not right. These reasons are not false. They are simply endless. Later becomes a place everything can be stored. Conversations that feel uncomfortable. Projects that matter too much to start carelessly. Changes that would require becoming someone unfamiliar. Later accepts them all without question. The problem with later is not that it lies. It is that it never has to prove anything. It remains undefined, which allows it to feel safe. Today, by contrast, is specific. Today asks for action without guarantees. As the morning unfolds, the awareness returns in brief flashes. Standing by the sink. Waiting for a screen to load. Looking at the same clock that has marked so many similar hours before. There is nothing dramatic in these moments. Just a quiet recognition that they are happening now, not on the way to something else. Life often feels like it is warming up, preparing for its real beginning. School leads to work. Work leads to stability. Stability leads to freedom. Freedom leads to living. Somewhere along the way, living keeps being postponed, always just one step further ahead. The idea that life will fully begin later is comforting. It makes the present feel temporary, a rehearsal rather than a performance. Rehearsals can be rushed. They can be endured. They do not have to be inhabited. Time does not make this distinction. It moves through rehearsals and performances with the same indifference. Hours are spent either way. Days pass regardless of how they are labeled. There is usually a moment when this becomes harder to ignore. It might arrive quietly, while sorting through old messages or photos. It might arrive in conversation, when someone mentions how quickly something passed. It might arrive through loss, when the future suddenly feels less spacious than it did before. The realization is not loud. It does not demand immediate change. It simply settles in. Later is not guaranteed. Later is an idea, not a place. This is not meant to provoke fear. It is meant to restore attention. Awareness of finitude does not shrink life. It sharpens it. It draws focus toward what matters enough to be lived now, without waiting for conditions to soften. The habit of postponement often disguises itself as patience. Patience has value. But patience that delays living indefinitely becomes avoidance with better language. The difference lies in whether time is being respected or deferred. Respecting time does not require constant intensity. It requires presence. It asks that days not be treated as disposable simply because they are ordinary. Ordinary days are not placeholders. They are the substance. As the morning continues, nothing outwardly changes. The schedule remains intact. Responsibilities wait as they always have. The shift, when it comes, happens internally. A subtle refusal to treat this day as something to get through on the way to another. Living does not require dramatic gestures. It begins with attention. With noticing how often the present is traded for an imagined future that never quite arrives. With recognizing that action, even imperfect action, belongs only to now. The day does not pause to acknowledge this recognition. It moves forward as it always does. The difference is not in what the day offers. It is in how it is met. Time is already passing. The only question is whether it is being waded through or lived within. By the middle of the day, motion takes over. Messages arrive. Tasks stack themselves into neat columns. Conversations begin and end without much ceremony. It is easy to feel occupied without feeling engaged. Busyness has a convincing weight to it. It gives the impression that something important is happening, even when nothing essential is being touched. In the spaces between tasks, There are small pauses that rarely get noticed. Waiting for a reply. Standing while the kettle heats again. Watching a cursor blink on a screen. These moments do not demand attention, but they offer it. They are quiet openings where awareness slips in if nothing rushes to cover them. Often, the same thought appears during these pauses. Not urgently. Not fully formed. Just a question that does not push for an answer. If not now, then when? It lingers briefly, then dissolves back into movement. Waiting feels practical here. The day is already full. There will be time later to think about what really matters. Later tonight. This weekend. After this stretch passes. Each delay feels justified by context. Context always exists. The longer something meaningful is postponed, the heavier it becomes. What began as a simple intention gathers expectations. Imagined outcomes multiply. The mind rehearses scenarios that have not happened yet, and each rehearsal adds weight. Starting begins to feel risky, not because the action is difficult, but because so much meaning has been placed on it. This is how waiting protects itself. It convinces you that delay is careful, that postponement is wisdom. It rarely admits how much energy it consumes. The effort required to avoid something meaningful can be greater than the effort required to face it. There is a moment many people recognize, though it often passes without comment. It arrives when an opportunity closes quietly. No announcement. No drama. Just the realization that something will not be revisited. The feeling that follows is not panic. It is specificity. A clear understanding of what was left undone. Regret rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives through details. A conversation never started. A skill meant to be learned. Time that felt available until it wasn't. These moments do not accuse. They simply inform. Distraction rushes in quickly after. Notifications. Noise. Something to fill the space. Distraction is efficient. It does not ask questions. It keeps attention moving just fast enough to avoid stillness. Stillness, when it is allowed, changes the tone of the day. Sitting with it for even a few moments reveals how much energy is spent anticipating later. How often life is treated as something that will begin once the current stretch is complete. The idea of abundant time makes postponement feel harmless. If there is always more time ahead, then nothing urgent is at risk. But abundance assumed too casually leads to carelessness. Days begin to feel interchangeable. Weeks blur. The present is handled lightly because it is not seen as final. Finality does not mean catastrophe. It means significance. This moment will not repeat itself. Not exactly. That knowledge does not require anxiety. It requires respect. Respect for time changes behavior quietly. It influences how conversations are entered. It affects how distractions are chosen. It makes it harder to justify deferring what feels essential. Essential things rarely demand attention loudly. They tend to wait. They sit beneath obligations and routines, patient but persistent. Waiting too long to meet them does not make them disappear. It makes them heavier. There is a shift that begins when the present is no longer treated as a draft. When today is allowed to count. This does not turn every hour into something meaningful in an obvious way. It simply removes the assumption that meaning lives elsewhere. Action becomes less dramatic in this frame. It is no longer about making a big move. It is about stepping toward what has been waiting without certainty. Beginning before confidence arrives. Speaking before everything is perfectly phrased. This does not eliminate fear. Fear remains. The difference is that fear is no longer given the authority to decide timing alone. It becomes one factor among many, not the final voice. As afternoon light changes, the day continues much as it always has. The world does not pause for insight. The opportunity lies not in changing the day, but in changing how it is inhabited. Later remains an option. It always will. The difference is whether it is chosen deliberately or used automatically. Whether waiting serves life or replaces it. The hours continue to pass. The invitation remains quiet but constant. This moment is available. It always has been. Evening approaches without ceremony. The light softens. Sounds from outside thin out and then return in a different pattern. The day begins to loosen its grip, not because everything is finished, but because energy shifts. There is a natural slowing that invites reflection if it is not filled too quickly. Many people experience this hour as a threshold. The workday releases its urgency, but the mind does not immediately follow. Thoughts keep moving in familiar loops. What was done? What was missed? What will need attention tomorrow? It is tempting to let these thoughts run unchecked, to treat the evening as a holding space between productive days. Waiting often hides here. Not in obvious procrastination, but in the assumption that living can resume after obligations are complete. That rest, connection, or reflection can be postponed until everything else is resolved. The body knows otherwise. It carries the accumulation of hours. The shoulders hold tension that was not noticed earlier. The eyes feel the weight of focus sustained too long. Sitting down becomes an act of recognition. Something has been spent today. There is a small choice available in this moment. It rarely feels significant. To reach immediately for distraction, or to sit briefly with the day as it was. To fill the silence, or to let it exist long enough to be felt. Silence does not provide answers. It provides clarity. In silence, it becomes easier to sense what was avoided. What mattered but was deferred. What energy kept circling without finding release. Many people mistake this awareness for dissatisfaction with life itself. In reality, it is often dissatisfaction with delay. With the sense that life is being negotiated rather than lived. Negotiation shows up in subtle ways. Promises made internally. Tomorrow I will start. Soon I will address this. After things calm down, I will make time. Each promise carries relief in the moment it is made. Each one also carries weight forward. Over time, these deferred intentions begin to crowd the future. Tomorrow becomes overloaded before it arrives. The mind carries an invisible backlog of things that matter but have not been met. This backlog creates pressure that feels diffuse. Not sharp enough to act on, but heavy enough to drain energy. It can make rest feel unearned, as though something important is always waiting just out of sight. The truth is simpler. The present moment is the only place where engagement can occur. Tomorrow will offer its own version of now, not a solution to what was postponed today. Recognizing this does not require radical change. It requires honesty. Honest acknowledgement that waiting has a cost. Honest assessment of which delays are strategic and which are habitual. Strategic waiting has intention. It has boundaries. It ends. Habitual waiting dissolves boundaries. It stretches indefinitely, justified by busyness or uncertainty. As evening settles in, there is an opportunity to notice this distinction without judgment. Not to resolve everything, but to name what has been carried forward unnecessarily. Naming does not mean acting on everything immediately. It means reducing the mental load created by pretending later will take care of it. Later does not take care of things. Attention does. Attention is a limited resource. When it is scattered across postponed concerns, it is not available for the moment at hand. Even rest becomes shallow when attention is divided. Deep rest requires presence. So does connection. So does satisfaction. None of these can be fully accessed while life is being deferred. There is a quiet courage in choosing to engage with what is here instead of waiting for the day to improve. This courage does not look dramatic. It looks like finishing one small thing that matters. Like sending a message that has been delayed. Like acknowledging a feeling instead of numbing it. These actions do not resolve life. They reintroduce participation. They remind the body and mind that life is happening now, not later. As night arrives, the day does not ask for completion. It simply ends. Whether it was lived or postponed remains the only meaningful distinction. Tomorrow will not correct today. It will continue it. The quality of that continuation is shaped by what is carried forward and what is met now. Choosing to meet even a small part of life today lightens the future. It reduces the backlog. It restores trust in the ability to engage. The room grows quieter. The light dims further. Nothing dramatic signals the importance of this moment. That is what makes it easy to miss. Life does not announce itself. It offers itself. Quietly. Repeatedly. In moments like this. Morning returns the way it always does, without checking whether anything has changed. Light reaches the same corners of the room. The air carries the same stillness before the day fills itself. The body moves again through familiar motions, but there is a slight difference in how those motions are felt. Less rush. More noticing. Habits do not disappear simply because awareness has grown. They remain, dependable and efficient. What changes is the relationship to them. Instead of being carried entirely by routine, attention begins to ride alongside it. There is a moment while getting ready when the day feels undecided. Not empty, but open. The list of obligations has not yet taken over. For a brief stretch, there is space to choose how the day will be entered rather than simply endured. Endurance had once been the default. Get through the hours. Handle what must be handled. Save energy for later, when things will slow down enough for life to resume. This mindset made sense when demands felt endless. But it also trained attention to look past the present rather than into it. Living with intention does not announce itself with motivation or excitement. It arrives quietly, often through small refusals. A refusal to immediately distract. A refusal to treat this hour as disposable. A refusal to assume that meaning belongs only to what comes after. Throughout the day, these refusals appear in ordinary places. While reading an email carefully instead of skimming. While listening fully instead of preparing a response. While stopping one task to finish another rather than opening something new. Finishing feels different from completing everything. Finishing is focused. It closes loops. Completion, when treated as an ideal, becomes impossible. There is always more to do. Waiting for completion before engaging leads to perpetual delay. The mind still resists this shift at times. It suggests efficiency. It argues that attention should be conserved. It warns that slowing down will lead to falling behind. These arguments sound reasonable. They often are. What they rarely account for is the cost of constant postponement. Postponement fragments attention. It scatters energy across unfinished intentions. It creates a background hum of mental noise that never quite turns off. Engaging with what is present quiets that noise, even when the work itself is demanding. There are moments during the day when this becomes clear. Sitting with a task that has been delayed too long. The first few minutes feel heavy. Resistance shows up. But once the task is entered, something shifts. The imagined weight gives way to actual effort. Effort, unlike imagination, has edges. It can be moved through. This is one of the quiet lies of waiting. It suggests that not acting preserves energy. Often, it does the opposite. It keeps energy tied up in anticipation and avoidance. As attention becomes more grounded, priorities begin to rearrange themselves. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Some tasks lose their urgency. Some distractions lose their appeal. What remains feels simpler, even if it is not easy. Simplicity here is not minimalism. It is clarity. Knowing what deserves attention now. Knowing what can wait intentionally rather than by default. Intentional waiting feels different. It is chosen. It has a reason. It has an end. Habitual waiting feels endless. It stretches without shape, carrying the promise of later without ever delivering it. The day continues. Meetings happen. Messages arrive. There is no sudden freedom from responsibility. The difference lies in how responsibility is held. Less as a burden to survive, more as a series of moments to enter. Entering responsibility does not mean enjoying every part of it. It means not separating yourself from it mentally. Resistance is allowed, but disengagement is questioned. Questioning disengagement reveals patterns. Certain tasks are delayed not because they are difficult, but because they require presence rather than speed. Presence exposes discomfort. Speed hides it. Slowing down enough to feel discomfort without immediately escaping it builds tolerance. Tolerance builds confidence. Confidence reduces the urge to wait. This confidence is not loud. It does not declare readiness. It shows itself through follow-through. Through beginning things that matter without needing reassurance. Over time, trust begins to form. Trust in your own responsiveness. Trust that uncertainty can be navigated. Trust that you will not abandon yourself by endlessly postponing what matters. Trust changes how decisions are made. Choices feel cleaner. There is less internal debate. Less justification required. Action follows awareness more naturally. As afternoon light shifts again, the day carries on. The world does not reflect this internal change outwardly. That is part of what makes it sustainable. There is no performance involved. No announcement. The real measure appears quietly. At the end of the day, when there is less need to replay everything mentally. Less sense of unfinished emotional business. Not because everything was resolved, but because nothing essential was deliberately avoided. Avoidance leaves residue. Engagement leaves tiredness, but it is a cleaner kind. It allows rest to feel earned rather than escapist. As evening approaches once more, the question is no longer how to get through the day. It becomes how to inhabit it honestly, one moment at a time. The answer is rarely dramatic. It is found in small decisions repeated consistently. In choosing now when later offers itself too easily. Time continues to move. That part never changes. What changes is the willingness to stand inside it rather than waiting for it to pass. By the time the week settles into its rhythm, patterns become easier to see. Not the dramatic kind, but the subtle ones that shape days quietly. The way attention drifts when something feels uncertain. The way certain tasks are pushed aside again and again, not because they are difficult, but because they ask for something personal. Personal effort feels different from technical effort. Technical effort can be measured. It has steps. Personal effort asks for presence. It requires showing up without armor. Waiting often appears here, not as laziness, but as self-protection. Protection has its place. Restoring energy matters. Choosing the right moment matters. But protection that never loosens becomes a cage. It limits movement while promising safety. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when protection turns into avoidance. It happens when delay no longer serves recovery or clarity. It serves distance. Distance from discomfort. Distance from responsibility. Distance from the possibility of change. Change does not announce itself loudly. It begins as a quiet invitation. A sense that something needs attention. That something important is being carried forward without being met. Meeting it rarely looks heroic. It looks like opening a document that has been closed too long. Like having a conversation that has been rehearsed but never begun. Like sitting with an uncomfortable feeling long enough for it to take shape. The first minutes of engagement often feel awkward. The mind resists. It offers reasons to stop. It points out how unpolished everything feels. This resistance is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of proximity. Proximity to what matters creates friction. That friction can be mistaken for danger. In reality, it is information. It tells you where energy has been stored, where attention has been withheld. As engagement continues, the friction changes. It does not disappear, but it becomes workable. Effort replaces anticipation. Action replaces speculation. The imagined weight of the task gives way to its actual shape. This shift is subtle but powerful. It teaches the nervous system that presence is survivable. That discomfort does not escalate indefinitely. That beginning does not lead to collapse. Over time, this learning accumulates. Confidence grows quietly. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of responsiveness. The sense that whatever arises can be addressed without needing perfect conditions. Perfect conditions lose their authority here. They are recognized as a myth that postponement relies on. Life rarely offers clarity before action. Clarity follows action more often than it precedes it. Following this understanding does not mean acting impulsively. It means noticing when waiting is no longer serving learning or care. It means choosing to move while uncertainty is still present. As days pass, this choice becomes less dramatic. It integrates into routine. Tasks are approached sooner. Conversations happen closer to when they are needed. Decisions are made with less internal negotiation. The mental space created by this shift is noticeable. Fewer open loops. Less background tension. Attention feels less divided. Rest becomes deeper because there is less to avoid. Avoidance, when it appears, is recognized more quickly. It no longer hides behind productivity. It is seen for what it is. A signal that something meaningful is asking to be met. Meeting it does not always require action. Sometimes it requires acknowledgement. Naming what has been postponed. Admitting why. This honesty alone can reduce its weight. Weight accumulates when things remain unnamed. When intentions stay vague. Precision, even uncomfortable precision, brings relief. It replaces anxiety with information. Information supports choice. Choice restores agency. Agency reduces helplessness. This chain unfolds quietly, without spectacle. The week continues. Responsibilities remain. Nothing external signals that a shift has occurred. That is part of what allows it to last. Change that demands recognition often collapses when attention moves on. Change that happens quietly embeds itself. By the end of the day, there is a different kind of tiredness. Not the fatigue of constant avoidance, but the fatigue of engagement. Muscles feel used. The mind feels settled. Settled does not mean satisfied with everything. It means at ease with effort having been offered where it mattered. It means there is less need to replay the day, less need to justify how time was spent. This ease carries into the evening. Rest does not feel like an escape. It feels like a natural pause. The body recognizes the difference. The day closes without asking for a summary. It does not demand that everything be resolved. It only reflects whether it was entered or bypassed. Tomorrow will offer another chance. Not a correction. A continuation. The quality of that continuation depends less on plans than on willingness. Willingness to begin before certainty arrives. Willingness to stay when discomfort appears. Willingness to choose now when later feels tempting. Time does not wait to see what will be chosen. It moves forward regardless. The difference is found in whether life is met along the way or left standing at a distance. Tonight, the room settles. The light fades. The day no longer asks for attention. What remains is the quiet knowledge that it was lived a little closer than before. That closeness matters more than it seems. As the days begin to string together, a subtle recalibration takes place. Nothing announces it. There is no clear dividing line between before and after. It shows itself in smaller ways. In how quickly attention returns after drifting. In how often action replaces rehearsal. Morning routines continue, but they feel less automatic. The weight of the day has not yet settled, and there is a brief window where choice feels more accessible. Not choice about everything, just about how the first moments are met. There is a difference between starting the day and entering it. Starting happens by default. Entering requires attention. Entering means noticing the texture of the morning instead of rushing through it. The sound of water running. The feel of the floor. The quiet before the world fills itself. This attention does not slow the day down in a practical sense. It grounds it. Grounding reduces the urge to escape forward into later. It anchors experience where it is actually happening. Throughout the day, situations arise that once would have been postponed without thought. A message that needs a response. A decision that cannot be optimized further. A task that feels unfinished but ready enough. These moments do not arrive as tests. They arrive as invitations. Invitations are easy to ignore. They do not demand acceptance. Waiting remains available as an option. What changes is how that option is evaluated. Instead of feeling neutral, it begins to feel like a choice with consequences. Consequences are not always dramatic. Often they are cumulative. A small delay here. Another there. Over time, they shape how life feels. Fragmented. Deferred. Slightly out of reach. Choosing to engage interrupts this accumulation. Even small acts of follow-through reduce the background sense of pressure. They close loops. They signal to the mind that attention will not be abandoned indefinitely. This signaling builds trust. Not confidence in outcomes, but trust in responsiveness. The belief that whatever arises can be addressed without needing to wait for perfect conditions. Perfect conditions remain appealing in theory. In practice, they rarely arrive. Waiting for them often means waiting without end. Recognizing this does not create urgency. It creates realism. Realism clarifies effort. It redirects energy away from speculation and toward action. Action does not require certainty. It requires willingness. Willingness shows up differently across the day. Sometimes it looks like beginning something small. Sometimes it looks like staying with a feeling that would usually be pushed aside. Sometimes it looks like stopping, recognizing that rest is the most honest response. Rest, when chosen deliberately, supports engagement rather than replacing it. There is a difference between rest that restores and rest that avoids. Presence makes that difference easier to sense. Avoidance tends to carry urgency. It feels like relief that must be reached quickly. Rest feels slower. It settles. It does not rush. As this distinction becomes clearer, energy is spent more intentionally. Fewer hours are lost to distraction that leaves nothing behind. More time is given to things that feel complete, even when they are simple. Completion does not require finality. It requires attention. A task done with presence feels different from one rushed through. A conversation entered fully carries weight even if it is brief. This weight accumulates quietly. Days feel fuller without being busier. The sense of time slipping away eases when moments are inhabited. Inhabiting moments does not eliminate difficulty. Some tasks remain unpleasant. Some conversations remain uncomfortable. The difference is that discomfort is no longer used as a reason to delay indefinitely. Facing discomfort early prevents it from growing. What is met while it is small remains manageable. What is postponed often becomes heavier than it needs to be. This is not about efficiency. It is about care. Care for attention. Care for time. Care for the life being lived in real time rather than imagined later. As afternoon gives way to evening again, there is less accumulation of mental residue. Fewer unfinished emotional threads. Not because everything was addressed, but because what mattered most was not deliberately avoided. Avoidance creates a particular kind of exhaustion. Engagement creates another. One drains. The other satisfies, even when it is tiring. This difference becomes easier to recognize. It guides decisions quietly. When choosing between postponement and participation, the body often knows before the mind finishes arguing. Trusting that knowledge simplifies things. Not every choice becomes easy. Fewer choices become tangled. The day ends as it always does. Light fades. Sounds change. There is no external marker of progress. That is not where the change lives. It lives in the absence of a familiar tension. In the sense that the day was entered rather than endured. That time, once again, was not left entirely for later. Tomorrow will offer more of the same. Not repetition, but opportunity. Opportunity to continue choosing presence over postponement. Life does not need to be seized. It needs to be met. And meeting it, moment by moment, is becoming less of an effort and more of a habit. By now, the contrast between postponement and engagement has become easier to feel. It shows up in the body before it reaches language. A subtle tightening when something is avoided. A different kind of tiredness when effort has been offered honestly. These signals do not need interpretation. They simply register. There are moments when waiting still appears convincing. It often arrives disguised as reason. The timing is not ideal. More information would help. Energy should be conserved. These thoughts are familiar. They once carried authority. Now they are noticed without being automatically obeyed. Notice how waiting often promises relief without requiring anything in return. It suggests that discomfort can be bypassed rather than faced. Engagement asks for something else. It asks for presence. It asks for effort without guarantees. Guarantees are rarely available. Learning to act without them changes the texture of decision-making. Choices become simpler, though not easier. The question shifts from whether an action will succeed to whether it is honest to take it now. Honesty becomes a practical tool. It cuts through mental loops. It reduces the time spent negotiating with oneself. Honest acknowledgement of fear or uncertainty often makes action more possible, not less. There is a moment that repeats itself across different situations. Standing at the edge of beginning. The task is visible. The next step is small. The mind hesitates anyway. This hesitation is no longer treated as a signal to stop. It is treated as part of the threshold. Thresholds feel uncomfortable by nature. They mark transitions. Crossing them changes something, even slightly. Waiting preserves familiarity. Engaging introduces movement. Movement does not have to be fast to be meaningful. Slow beginnings carry their own momentum. A few minutes spent with full attention can shift an entire day's tone. Tone matters. A day entered with presence feels different from a day endured. Even when circumstances are similar, the experience changes. The difference lies in participation. Participation reduces fragmentation. Instead of juggling multiple unfinished intentions, attention is placed where it can actually be used. This focus brings relief. The mind relaxes when it is no longer carrying everything at once. Relaxation here is not passive. It is the result of alignment. When action matches awareness, tension eases. This alignment becomes easier to recognize over time. There is less need to push. Less need to motivate. Engagement begins to happen naturally when resistance is not treated as an enemy. Resistance becomes information about what matters. What matters often asks for courage of a quiet kind. Not bold declarations, but steady follow-through. Doing the thing that has been delayed without turning it into an identity test. Identity tests create pressure. Pressure feeds avoidance. Removing that pressure makes action feel more approachable. This task does not define you. This conversation does not determine everything. It is simply part of living. Living, when reduced to manageable units, becomes less overwhelming. The present moment shrinks to a size that can be handled. Tomorrow does not need to be solved today. This understanding softens the future's grip. Plans are still made. Goals still exist. But they are no longer used as reasons to neglect the present. They are informed by it. Informing plans through experience leads to more realistic direction. Instead of imagining how things should unfold, you learn how they actually do. This knowledge is more useful than speculation. Speculation consumes energy without offering resolution. Engagement, even when imperfect, provides feedback. Feedback refines effort. Effort becomes more targeted. Targeted effort feels sustainable. It avoids burnout by focusing attention where it counts. This selectivity grows naturally when time is respected. Respecting time does not mean filling it. It means inhabiting it. Allowing moments to be complete even if they are brief. Recognizing when enough has been done for now. Knowing when to stop is as important as knowing when to begin. Ending the day without squeezing every remaining drop of energy prevents resentment. It preserves capacity for tomorrow. Tomorrow no longer feels like a place where life will finally start. It feels like a continuation of what is already happening. This continuity removes pressure from both days. As evening arrives again, there is space to sit with the day without replaying it endlessly. What was met feels settled. What was not met is seen more clearly, without accusation. Clarity without judgment invites return. It makes it easier to try again rather than retreat. Waiting loses its appeal when engagement proves survivable. Survivable becomes livable. Livable becomes familiar. Familiarity reduces fear. Fear no longer sets the schedule. The schedule still exists. Obligations remain. What changes is the relationship to them. They are entered more directly. Less time is spent circling them from a distance. This directness brings a sense of steadiness. Not excitement. Not certainty. Just a feeling of being where you are while time moves. Time continues regardless. That fact no longer feels threatening. It feels grounding. There is something solid in meeting it rather than postponing yourself. The day closes quietly. The light recedes. Nothing announces progress. The absence of delay is the only marker. That absence is enough. As engagement becomes more familiar, the idea of later begins to lose its shine. It does not disappear entirely, but it no longer feels like a solution. It feels abstract, distant, lacking the substance that comes from action. The present, by contrast, feels textured. It has edges. It can be touched. There is a moment during the day, often unremarkable, when this contrast becomes clear. Sitting with an unfinished task. Standing outside while the light shifts toward evening. Waiting briefly before speaking. In these moments, the choice is not between success and failure. It is between presence and postponement. Presence does not promise comfort. It promises contact. Contact with effort. Contact with uncertainty. Contact with the reality of what is actually required. This contact removes ambiguity. Ambiguity is what allows waiting to feel endless. Endlessness is part of waiting's appeal. If later has no shape, it cannot disappoint. But it also cannot satisfy. Satisfaction requires experience. It requires entering something far enough to feel its weight. Weight here is not heaviness. It is reality. Tasks have boundaries. Conversations have limits. Even difficult experiences end. Anticipation, by contrast, has no end point. It stretches indefinitely, draining energy without resolution. Recognizing this shifts how time is valued. Time is no longer something to be filled or escaped. It becomes something to be inhabited. This change is subtle, but it alters how hours are approached. Approaching an hour with intention does not mean planning it perfectly. It means deciding how attention will be used within it. Attention is treated as finite. Where it goes determines how the hour feels. This awareness reduces overextension. Saying yes becomes more deliberate. Saying no becomes less dramatic. Boundaries form naturally when time is respected. Respect for time extends inward as well. Internal expectations soften. Not every day must be productive in visible ways. What matters is whether the day was entered honestly. Honesty remains the anchor. Honest effort. Honest rest. Honest acknowledgement of resistance. When honesty guides decisions, the need to justify delay diminishes. Delay still appears, but it is seen clearly. Sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes it signals fatigue. Sometimes it reveals fear. Knowing which is which prevents postponement from becoming automatic. Automatic behavior had once dominated. Days moved forward without much awareness. Now, awareness interrupts that drift. Not constantly, but often enough to change direction. Direction does not require certainty. It requires orientation. Knowing roughly where attention belongs, even when the path is incomplete. This orientation creates steadiness. When circumstances change, steadiness prevents collapse. Life can adjust without losing coherence. Coherence feels grounding. It creates a sense that actions belong together. That effort is not scattered. This sense reduces anxiety about whether enough is being done. Enough becomes contextual rather than comparative. Enough for today. Enough attention. Enough care. Measuring against others fades when life is measured from the inside. Internal measurement is quieter. It does not demand constant assessment. It notices when alignment is present and when it has slipped. Slipping is expected. Return is what matters. Return happens more quickly now. The moment attention drifts too far into anticipation or avoidance, it is noticed. Not criticized. Simply noticed. This noticing shortens the distance back to presence. Presence, once reclaimed, feels familiar. It does not need to be rebuilt each time. This familiarity makes engagement less effortful. Effort still exists. Tasks still require work. The difference is that effort is applied where it can actually be used, not spent on avoiding what needs attention. Avoidance had once felt protective. Now it feels inefficient. It costs more than it saves. Engagement, even when difficult, provides clarity and relief. Relief does not mean ease. It means the absence of unnecessary tension. The tension that comes from carrying unfinished intentions forward day after day. As this tension lifts, rest becomes deeper. Sleep arrives more easily. The body senses that less is being held back. Recovery improves when life is not being postponed internally. The future begins to feel less heavy. Not because plans are clearer, but because fewer unresolved moments are being carried into it. The present is doing more of its share. This redistribution eases pressure. Tomorrow no longer has to compensate for today. Each day stands more fully on its own. As evening settles again, the day closes with less mental residue. There is less need to revisit what happened. Less need to imagine how it could have gone differently. What matters is simple. The day was met. Not perfectly. Not completely. But honestly. Honesty leaves fewer loose ends. It allows the day to end without dragging itself forward unnecessarily. Life continues. Time moves on. The difference is quiet but decisive. The present is no longer something to pass through. It is where living is taking place. There comes a point when urgency and importance separate themselves without effort. Urgency still raises its voice. It demands quick responses and fast movement. Importance remains quieter. It waits to be noticed. Learning the difference does not happen through analysis. It happens through experience. Experience teaches that urgent things multiply easily. They expand to fill whatever space is given to them. Important things do not compete. They remain present beneath the noise, unchanged by how busy the day becomes. Listening for importance requires slowing down just enough to hear it. Not stopping entirely. Not withdrawing. Just creating enough space for attention to land somewhere other than the loudest demand. Often, importance shows up through discomfort. A sense that something is unfinished in a deeper way. Not incomplete, but unmet. The discomfort does not explain itself. It simply stays. Waiting has a way of softening that discomfort temporarily. It offers relief by deferral. But relief gained this way fades quickly. The discomfort returns, usually stronger, because it has been ignored rather than addressed. Addressing it does not always mean acting immediately. Sometimes it means acknowledging what is being avoided. Naming it internally. Admitting that delay is no longer neutral. Neutral delay feels different from avoidance. Neutral delay has a reason. It protects energy. It creates space. Avoidance creates tension. It carries a subtle sense of dishonesty. Dishonesty here is not moral. It is experiential. It is the feeling of not being fully where you are. Of promising yourself engagement later while knowing that later keeps moving. When this feeling is noticed, choice becomes clearer. Not easier, but clearer. The question shifts from whether now is comfortable to whether now is honest. Honest engagement often feels smaller than imagined. It rarely requires solving everything at once. It requires one step taken with attention. One response offered directly. One beginning made without waiting for certainty. This scale matters. Waiting often inflates the size of what is being avoided. It turns manageable actions into overwhelming abstractions. Beginning reduces them back to their real proportions. Real proportions are easier to work with. Effort becomes tangible. Progress becomes visible. Even setbacks feel informative rather than discouraging. Information replaces speculation. Instead of imagining outcomes, you begin to see them. This visibility reduces fear. Fear thrives in uncertainty. It weakens when reality is entered. Entering reality does not guarantee success. It guarantees contact. Contact provides data. Data allows adjustment. Adjustment keeps life moving. Movement here is not acceleration. It is responsiveness. Responding to what is actually happening rather than what might happen later. This responsiveness builds resilience. Not resilience defined by endurance alone, but resilience defined by flexibility. The ability to adapt without withdrawing. Withdrawal had once been the strategy of waiting. It created distance in the name of safety. That distance now feels unnecessary. Engaging with life directly, even when it is difficult, feels more stabilizing. Stability does not come from control. It comes from participation. Being part of the process rather than observing it from the edge. Observation has its place. Reflection matters. But reflection that replaces action eventually becomes avoidance. Balancing the two requires attention rather than rules. Attention reveals when reflection has turned into rehearsal. When planning has turned into postponement. These transitions are subtle. Awareness makes them visible. Visibility restores agency. When patterns are seen, they lose some of their power. Choice re-enters the picture. Choice does not always lead to dramatic change. Often it leads to consistency. Small, repeated acts of engagement that reshape how time is experienced. Time begins to feel less fragmented. Days connect more smoothly. There is less sense of rushing toward evenings or weekends as escapes. Each segment of the day carries its own weight. Weight here means presence. The feeling that moments count because they are inhabited, not because they are exceptional. This shifts how success is defined. Success becomes less about outcomes and more about alignment. About whether effort matched awareness. About whether life was met where it appeared. Alignment does not eliminate mistakes. It reframes them. Mistakes become part of learning rather than reasons to retreat. They are absorbed into experience rather than used as evidence against action. This absorption reduces hesitation. Each engagement builds familiarity. Familiarity builds confidence. Confidence shortens the distance between intention and action. As this distance shrinks, waiting loses relevance. It no longer feels like wisdom by default. It becomes one option among many, evaluated honestly rather than assumed. Evenings feel different now. Not quieter necessarily, but cleaner. Fewer unresolved intentions linger in the background. What remains feels manageable. The mind rests more easily when it is not carrying the weight of deferred living. Sleep comes with less mental noise. The body senses that effort has been offered where it mattered. Tomorrow still holds uncertainty. That does not change. What changes is the relationship to it. Uncertainty is no longer a reason to delay participation. Participation continues. Not forcefully. Not perfectly. But consistently. Life moves forward. Time passes. The difference remains in how often the present is entered rather than postponed. And now, that entry happens more naturally than it once did. As this way of living settles in, the future begins to feel different. Not closer in the sense of control, but closer in relevance. It no longer functions as a place where life will finally begin. It feels like an extension of what is already happening. This shift removes a subtle pressure that once shaped decisions. The pressure to prepare endlessly. To arrive fully formed before acting. To wait until confidence replaces uncertainty. Confidence, it turns out, is often the result of movement, not its cause. Movement here does not mean constant activity. It means engagement when engagement is called for. It means responding instead of deferring. Over time, this responsiveness builds trust. Trust not in outcomes, but in the ability to navigate whatever arises. That trust changes how effort is applied. Effort becomes quieter. Less dramatic. It is offered without needing to prove anything. Tasks are entered because they matter, not because they guarantee progress. Guarantees lose their importance. Life rarely provides them, and waiting for them keeps attention suspended. Accepting uncertainty frees energy. It allows action to happen alongside doubt rather than after it disappears. Doubt still appears. It always will. What changes is its role. Doubt becomes a companion rather than a gatekeeper. It travels alongside effort without determining whether effort is allowed. This relationship with doubt makes decision-making more fluid. Choices are made with partial information. Adjustments follow. The process feels iterative rather than evaluative. Iterative living reduces pressure. There is no single moment where everything must be decided correctly. Direction is refined through action, not predicted in advance. This refinement is practical. It reveals what actually fits. What sustains energy? What drains it? Waiting often obscures these distinctions. Only engagement makes them clear. Clarity arrives through contact. Contact with work. Contact with people. Contact with internal responses that cannot be accessed from a distance. These responses provide guidance more reliable than abstract planning. Planning still matters. It is simply no longer used as shelter. Plans support action instead of replacing it. They remain flexible, responsive to what is learned along the way. Flexibility becomes a strength. When circumstances shift, adjustment feels possible. There is less attachment to how things were supposed to unfold. Reality is met as it is rather than resisted. Resistance had once fueled delay. It insisted that conditions should improve before life could be entered. Letting go of that insistence changes everything quietly. Quiet change lasts. It does not depend on momentum or excitement. It integrates into daily life without needing reinforcement. Presence becomes the default more often than not. When presence is the default, time feels less adversarial. Hours are not something to survive or escape. They are something to inhabit. Even difficult hours feel more manageable when they are not resisted internally. This internal ease does not eliminate challenge. It reduces friction around it. Effort goes directly into what needs to be done rather than into negotiating with avoidance. Negotiation had once consumed enormous energy. Internal arguments about timing. Justifications for delay. Promises to start later. As these fade, attention becomes available. Available attention sharpens experience. Details become noticeable again. The tone of a conversation. The feeling of completion after focused effort. The relief of addressing something directly. These details do not demand attention. They reward it. Over time, they reinforce engagement. The benefits of presence become experiential rather than theoretical. Theory had once dominated. Ideas about living fully. Plans for future change. Presence turns these ideas into lived moments. Living becomes less about concept and more about contact. Contact with life brings humility. There is an acceptance that not everything will be resolved. That some uncertainty will remain. This acceptance removes the need to wait for closure before participating. Participation continues even when things feel unfinished. Especially then. Life does not pause for resolution. Engaging with it as it unfolds prevents stagnation. Stagnation had often been mistaken for patience. In reality, it was hesitation extended over time. Recognizing this difference allows patience to be used wisely rather than habitually. Wise patience has shape. It knows when to wait and when to move. It is informed by awareness rather than fear. Fear still appears, but it no longer dictates timing alone. It is listened to, considered, and weighed against what matters. Often, what matters is action itself. Action restores momentum. Not the frantic kind, but a steady forward motion. This motion makes life feel continuous rather than episodic. Continuity brings comfort of a particular kind. Not comfort from ease, but comfort from coherence. The sense that life is being lived in sequence rather than deferred. As days continue, there is less urgency to mark progress. Less need to measure change. The evidence is felt internally. In reduced tension. In clearer decisions. In deeper rest. Rest arrives without the same guilt it once carried. It is recognized as part of living, not an interruption. When rest follows engagement, it restores rather than numbs. Numbing had once been a substitute for rest. It filled time without restoring energy. Presence makes the difference visible. This visibility supports better choices. Less time is spent escaping. More time is spent engaging, even in small ways. Small ways accumulate. They shape the days. They shape the future that once felt distant. The future no longer feels like a place where life will finally happen. It feels like the direction life is already moving in, one engaged moment at a time. Over time, the sense of being behind begins to fade. Not because everything has been caught up, but because the idea of catching up no longer defines the experience of living. Days are no longer measured by how far they advance some imagined timeline. They are measured by whether they were entered with attention. This changes the internal atmosphere. The constant low-grade urgency that once followed everything starts to loosen. There is more room to breathe inside decisions. Less pressure to optimize every choice. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like something to stay in relationship with. Relationship implies responsiveness. It asks for listening as much as action. There are moments when action is not the answer. Moments when rest, patience, or restraint serve life better than movement. The difference now is that these pauses are chosen, not defaulted into. Chosen pauses feel grounded. They have edges. They end. Default waiting stretches without shape, quietly consuming time while promising relief that never quite arrives. Recognizing this distinction restores clarity. Clarity affects how commitments are made. Fewer promises are offered automatically. There is more consideration of what each commitment will require in attention and energy. Saying yes becomes more deliberate. Saying no becomes more honest. Honesty simplifies things. It reduces the mental effort of maintaining appearances. There is less internal conflict between what is said and what is felt. Alignment between intention and action strengthens. This alignment does not require perfection. It requires return. Attention drifts. Old habits resurface. The difference is in how quickly this is noticed and how gently attention is brought back. Gentleness matters. Harsh self-correction only fuels avoidance. Gentle awareness invites re-engagement without drama. It keeps the practice sustainable. Sustainability becomes an unspoken priority. Not pushing harder, but continuing longer. Not demanding transformation, but allowing change to unfold through consistency. Consistency reshapes confidence. Confidence is no longer tied to certainty or visible success. It is tied to reliability. The reliability of showing up. Of beginning again after drifting. Of choosing presence when later feels tempting. Later still appears. It always will. But its influence weakens. It is no longer treated as a solution by default. It must justify itself. It must explain what it is protecting and for how long. Often, it has no clear answer. When that becomes apparent, action feels simpler. Not easier, but cleaner. Clean action carries less internal residue. When something is addressed directly, it does not linger as unfinished emotional business. Even if the outcome is imperfect, engagement provides closure of a certain kind. Closure here does not mean resolution. It means honesty. It means knowing that effort was offered rather than withheld. This knowledge allows the mind to rest more fully. Rest deepens when there is less to avoid. Sleep arrives without the same mental replay. The body senses that life was met rather than deferred. Deferred living creates a particular tension. It keeps attention split between now and later. Living attentively reunites attention with the present. This reunion feels stabilizing. Stability does not eliminate change. It makes change navigable. When life shifts unexpectedly, there is less scrambling for control. Engagement continues, adapted to new conditions. Adaptation becomes a skill rather than a stressor. The ability to adjust without withdrawing builds resilience. Resilience here is not toughness. It is flexibility paired with presence. Presence reveals when something no longer fits. Paths once chosen may need revision. Waiting for certainty before adjusting only delays necessary change. Small corrections made early prevent larger disruptions later. This responsiveness keeps life aligned with lived values rather than static plans. Plans remain useful, but they are held lightly. They serve life rather than define it. Defining life through plans alone had once fueled waiting. Living within experience reduces that dependence. Experience provides ongoing feedback. Feedback refines direction. It shows what sustains energy and what drains it. What feels meaningful over time and what loses relevance. This information cannot be accessed from a distance. Distance had once felt safe. Now it feels limiting. Engagement, even when it brings discomfort, offers more clarity than avoidance ever did. As this understanding settles, the fear of wasting time changes shape. It no longer focuses on missing achievements. It focuses on missing presence. This shift is subtle but powerful. Presence becomes the primary value. Not intensity. Not productivity. Presence. Showing up to what is here with what is available. This does not make every moment satisfying. Some moments remain dull. Others remain difficult. What changes is the relationship to them. They are not written off as placeholders. They are allowed to be part of life. Allowing moments to matter reduces regret. Looking back, there is less focus on what should have been different and more recognition of what was lived. Living leaves traces. Not always visible, but felt. A sense of coherence. A sense of having participated rather than waited. As another day draws to a close, there is no need to audit it harshly. The measure is simple. Was attention offered where it mattered? Was life entered rather than deferred? The answer does not need to be perfect to be sufficient. Consistency carries more weight than any single day. Tomorrow will arrive as it always does. Quietly. Without promises. Without guarantees. It will offer moments again. And again, the choice will be the same. To wait for life to begin, or to meet it as it unfolds. At some point, the effort to remain present begins to feel less like work and more like orientation. Attention still wanders. Old habits still surface. What changes is the speed of return. Coming back no longer feels like correction. It feels like remembering where you are. This remembering happens in ordinary places. Sitting at a desk with an unfinished task. Standing at a sink with warm water running. Walking a familiar route without needing to fill the silence. The body registers these moments before the mind explains them. There is a growing ease with incompleteness. Projects remain in progress. Questions remain open. This no longer feels like failure. It feels like continuity. Life is understood as something unfolding rather than something to finalize before participating. Finality had once been the imagined reward for waiting. Once everything was resolved, life could begin. That expectation fades. Resolution is recognized as temporary at best. Participation, by contrast, is always available. This realization changes how difficulty is met. When discomfort appears, the instinct to postpone engagement weakens. Discomfort is allowed to be present without becoming a reason to retreat. Staying with it, even briefly, often reveals that it is more tolerable than imagined. Tolerance builds confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet confidence of familiarity. Familiarity with uncertainty. Familiarity with effort. Familiarity with beginning again after hesitation. Beginning again becomes a skill. Each return strengthens it. The gap between intention and action shortens. Less energy is spent convincing yourself to start. More energy is available for the work itself. Work here does not refer only to productivity. It includes emotional work, relational work, the work of paying attention to what is actually happening rather than what is hoped for later. Hope remains, but it is grounded. It no longer floats ahead of the present, pulling attention forward. It sits alongside effort, informed by experience rather than fantasy. Fantasy had once offered escape. Imagined futures felt cleaner than the present. Presence reveals texture. Texture includes complexity, ambiguity, and friction. It also includes satisfaction that cannot be accessed from a distance. Satisfaction here is not constant pleasure. It is the sense of having engaged honestly. Of having responded rather than deferred. This sense persists even when outcomes are mixed. Mixed outcomes become easier to accept. They are no longer interpreted as signs that waiting would have been wiser. They are understood as information gained through participation. Information accumulates through contact. Through trying. Through adjusting. Waiting provides no such data. It keeps everything theoretical. Theory has its place. Reflection matters. But reflection that replaces action stalls learning. Action, even tentative action, completes the loop. Completing loops reduces mental noise. Fewer things circle endlessly in the background. Attention feels more available. Rest deepens. Rest becomes restorative rather than numbing. There is less urgency to escape the day. Evenings feel less crowded with unresolved intentions. The body senses this shift. Muscles release more easily. Sleep arrives with less resistance. There is a feeling of having spent energy where it mattered rather than leaking it through avoidance. Avoidance had once consumed more than it saved. It required constant justification. Presence simplifies the internal landscape. Fewer arguments. Fewer promises deferred. This simplicity does not make life easy. It makes it navigable. When challenges arise, they are met closer to when they appear. Small corrections are made early. Pressure does not accumulate as easily. Accumulation had been the hidden cost of waiting. Unmet conversations. Unstarted projects. Unacknowledged feelings. Presence addresses these incrementally, preventing overload. Incremental engagement feels sustainable. It does not require dramatic change. It requires consistency. Returning attention to what is here, again and again. Consistency reshapes identity quietly. You begin to trust yourself differently. Not because you always choose perfectly, but because you choose to respond rather than disappear. Disappearing had once felt protective. Now it feels unnecessary. Engagement, even when uncomfortable, offers more stability than distance ever did. Stability here is not rigidity. It is flexibility grounded in attention. The ability to adjust without losing orientation. To change direction without abandoning presence. This flexibility supports growth without strain. Growth is no longer forced. It emerges through repeated contact with life as it is. As days continue, there is less need to mark progress. Less need to evaluate constantly. The evidence is experiential. Reduced tension. Clearer decisions. Deeper rest. Rest does not signal an ending. It signals continuation. Energy is restored not to escape life, but to re-enter it. The future no longer holds the promise of rescue. It holds direction. Direction shaped by how today is lived. Today remains ordinary. It contains routine and responsibility. It also contains moments of choice. Each one small. Each one shaping the texture of time. Time continues regardless. The difference lies in whether it is inhabited or postponed. Inhabiting it does not require perfection. It requires willingness. Willingness to stay. Willingness to begin again. Willingness to let the present be enough to step into. And step by step, that willingness is becoming familiar. As presence becomes more familiar, the sense of urgency that once surrounded time begins to soften. Not because time feels endless, but because it is no longer being resisted. There is less arguing with the pace of life. Less wishing it would slow down or hurry up. The moment is met at the speed it arrives. This changes how pressure is experienced. Pressure does not disappear, but it becomes more specific. Instead of a vague sense of being behind, there are clear points of effort. Something needs attention now. Something else can wait intentionally. The distinction reduces mental noise. Mental noise had once been constant. A background commentary on what should be happening instead. Presence quiets that commentary. Not through force, but through occupation. Attention placed fully somewhere has little room for elsewhere. Elsewhere had once held so much promise. A future version of life that would feel lighter, more certain, more complete. As engagement deepens, that imagined future loses its grip. It no longer competes with the present for attention. The present, once entered consistently, reveals its own richness. Not excitement, but texture. Subtle variation. Small moments that feel complete on their own. The sense that life does not need to be postponed to feel real. Reality brings responsibility, but also relief. There is relief in no longer negotiating endlessly with later. Relief in knowing where effort belongs today. Relief in allowing days to be what they are rather than what they should have been. Shoulds begin to loosen. Not all at once, but steadily. Expectations inherited from others or from earlier versions of yourself lose authority. Decisions are guided more by lived values than by imagined standards. Values clarify through action. What is returned to repeatedly reveals importance more reliably than what is planned abstractly. Waiting often hides this information. Engagement makes it visible. Visibility brings honesty. Honest recognition of what sustains energy and what drains it. Honest acknowledgement of limits. Honest acceptance that some paths will not be taken. Letting go of paths once imagined can feel like loss. Presence allows that loss to be felt without becoming paralyzing. Grief here is quiet. It honors what might have been while making space for what is. Space is created not by clearing everything away, but by choosing deliberately. Fewer commitments. More intention. This selectivity supports depth rather than breadth. Depth feels stabilizing. There is less scattering of effort. Attention rests longer in one place. Even when effort is demanding, it feels purposeful rather than frantic. Frantic energy had often fueled waiting. The sense of needing to prepare more, do more, be more before acting. As that energy settles, action becomes simpler. Simple does not mean easy. It means direct. Doing what can be done now, with what is available. Leaving the rest without turning it into an excuse. Excuses lose their appeal when presence is valued. Honest acknowledgement of fear or fatigue replaces rationalization. Once named, these states can be addressed rather than hidden behind delay. Addressing them may mean rest. It may mean asking for support. It may mean beginning anyway, gently. Presence allows for this nuance. Nuance makes living feel humane. There is room for effort and for pause. Room for ambition and for acceptance. Waiting is no longer the default response to discomfort. Discomfort still appears. It always will. What changes is the relationship to it. It is seen as part of engagement rather than a signal to stop living. This relationship builds resilience of a quiet kind. The ability to stay with uncertainty without retreating into postponement. The ability to continue without needing reassurance at every step. Reassurance had once been sought through planning and delay. Now it comes from experience. From knowing that effort can be offered and adjusted. that mistakes do not end participation. Participation becomes the central measure. Whether life was entered, whether attention was offered, whether the present was treated as real. Real moments accumulate. Looking back, there is less sense of having missed something essential. Not because everything desired was achieved, but because life was not repeatedly deferred. Deferred living leaves a hollow feeling. Lived moments leave traces. Memory feels fuller. Time feels inhabited rather than spent. As the day winds down again, there is no need to evaluate it harshly. The question remains simple. Was life met where it appeared? The answer does not need to be perfect. Consistency matters more than completion. The practice continues. Tomorrow will arrive as it always does. Without ceremony. Without promise. It will offer moments again. And the orientation remains. To meet them rather than wait for something else. There is a stage where the effort of choosing presence gives way to something steadier. It no longer feels like a decision repeated each time. It feels like a default setting that occasionally needs adjustment rather than constant correction. Time is still limited. That fact does not change. What changes is the way limitation is experienced. Instead of feeling like pressure, it begins to feel like structure. The day has edges. Those edges make choices clearer. Clarity reduces waste. Not waste in a moral sense, but in an energetic one. Less energy is spent rehearsing futures or revisiting the past. More is available for what is happening now. This availability alters relationships. Listening becomes fuller. Responses come from attention rather than anticipation. Conversations are entered instead of managed. Even brief interactions feel more complete when they are not rushed internally. Completeness does not require length. It requires presence. A few minutes of genuine attention can carry more weight than hours spent distracted. This realization reshapes how time with others is valued. Work is affected as well. Tasks are no longer approached as hurdles to clear before life resumes. They are part of life. Entering them fully, even when they are repetitive or dull, reduces resistance. Resistance does not vanish, but it changes character. Instead of blocking action entirely, it becomes something that can be moved alongside. Work is done with resistance present rather than waiting for it to disappear. Waiting for perfect motivation had once stalled progress. Now motivation is allowed to follow effort rather than precede it. Beginning becomes possible even on days when enthusiasm is low. Low enthusiasm is no longer treated as a problem to solve. It is treated as a condition to work within. This flexibility prevents momentum from collapsing when emotions fluctuate. Emotional fluctuation is normal. Expecting consistency of feeling creates unnecessary frustration. Expecting consistency of engagement is more realistic. Engagement is quieter than motivation. It does not spike. It persists. This persistence reshapes confidence over time. Confidence grows not from peaks, but from reliability. Reliability toward yourself becomes noticeable. Promises are made more carefully. Follow-through becomes more common. Trust builds quietly through repetition. Trust reduces hesitation. Decisions feel less loaded. There is less need to analyze every possible outcome before acting. Action is taken with the understanding that adjustment is always possible. Adjustment becomes part of the process rather than a sign of failure. Changing course is not treated as evidence that waiting would have been wiser. It is treated as responsiveness. Responsiveness keeps life aligned with reality rather than with outdated plans. It allows direction to evolve without feeling like something has gone wrong. This evolution softens regret. Choices made in good faith are easier to accept, even when results are mixed. Regret loses its sharp edge when life is engaged honestly. Honest engagement leaves fewer questions unanswered. Even when outcomes are disappointing, there is knowledge gained. Knowledge replaces speculation. Speculation had once filled long stretches of mental space. Imagining what might happen later felt safer than acting now. Presence replaces speculation with experience. Experience, even difficult experience, feels grounding. It places you inside life rather than beside it. That placement reduces the sense of watching time pass from a distance. Distance had once made days feel interchangeable. Presence gives each day its own shape. Even routine days carry texture when they are entered attentively. Texture is subtle. It lives in small details. The tone of light at a certain hour. The feeling of completion after focused effort. The quiet satisfaction of having addressed something directly. These details are easy to miss when attention is elsewhere. When they are noticed, they make life feel fuller without needing to be extraordinary. Extraordinary moments still occur, but they no longer carry the burden of making life meaningful. Meaning is distributed across ordinary engagement. This distribution reduces pressure. Life does not have to peak constantly. It only has to be met. Meeting life includes meeting endings. When a day ends, it is allowed to end. There is less urge to extend it mentally by replaying everything that happened or did not happen. Rest comes more naturally when the day has been inhabited. The body recognizes when effort has been honest. Sleep deepens when there is less internal avoidance. Avoidance had once stretched days beyond their natural limits. Engagement allows them to close cleanly. Tomorrow does not have to compensate as much for what was not addressed today. As this pattern continues, the sense of being perpetually behind fades further. Life feels less like something to catch up with and more like something unfolding at a human pace. This pace is not slow or fast by definition. It is appropriate. It adjusts to circumstance. It allows urgency when necessary and patience when possible. Patience here is no longer passive. It is active restraint, knowing when not to act without turning inaction into avoidance. This discernment marks maturity. Not a final state, but an ongoing practice. One that does not announce itself. One that simply continues. As another evening settles, there is no need to summarize the day. It does not ask for evaluation. It only reflects whether it was met. The reflection is quiet. The answer is imperfect. And that is enough. By now, the idea of beginning no longer carries the weight it once did. Beginning has been redefined through repetition. It is no longer a dramatic threshold or a declaration of change. It is a modest movement toward what is already asking for attention. This shift alters how mornings are felt. There is less internal negotiation about how the day should unfold. Fewer promises made to later versions of yourself. The day is entered closer to where it actually begins. Entering does not guarantee satisfaction. Some days remain dense. Others feel scattered. What remains consistent is the willingness to meet them without waiting for them to improve first. Improvement had once been the condition for engagement. Life would be lived once circumstances aligned, once energy returned, once clarity arrived. Experience has shown otherwise. Engagement often creates the conditions it was waiting for. This understanding simplifies effort. It removes the need for elaborate preparation. What matters most is proximity. Staying close to what is happening instead of hovering above it. Hovering had felt safe. Distance offered perspective. But too much distance turned into detachment. Detachment dulled experience. Presence restores it. Restoration is gradual. It happens through repeated contact with ordinary moments. Sitting with a task long enough to feel its rhythm. Allowing a conversation to unfold without rushing toward resolution. Letting a feeling exist without immediately naming or fixing it. These practices do not feel heroic. They feel practical. They make life workable. They reduce the sense of living on hold. Living on hold creates a particular strain. It splits attention between now and later. It asks the present to justify itself by what it leads to. When that justification is removed, the present gains weight. Weight does not mean heaviness. It means substance. The sense that time is being used rather than passed through. This substance changes how days connect. There is less fragmentation. Yesterday does not feel abandoned. Tomorrow does not feel burdened. Each day contributes something small but real. Contribution matters more than accumulation. Not everything needs to add up quickly. Life does not require constant advancement to feel meaningful. It requires participation. Participation is rarely dramatic. It looks like responding when something needs response. It looks like beginning when something needs beginning. It looks like stopping when stopping is the most honest choice. Honesty remains the guide. Honest effort. Honest rest. Honest acknowledgement of limits. When honesty leads, waiting loses its disguise. Disguise had allowed postponement to feel reasonable. Now it is seen clearly. Sometimes waiting is wise. Often it is habit. Knowing the difference changes timing. Timing becomes less about external cues and more about internal alignment. Does acting now respect energy? Does waiting serve care? These questions replace rigid rules. Rules had once been sought as protection. If the right rule could be found, life could be lived safely. Experience proves otherwise. Flexibility grounded in attention is more reliable. Reliability builds trust. Trust reduces the urge to delay. When you trust yourself to respond, you no longer need to wait for certainty. Certainty was never the real requirement. Permission was. Permission to act imperfectly. Permission to change course. Permission to be in progress. Progress no longer needs to be announced. It is felt in the ease of beginning. In the reduced friction of decision-making. In the absence of constant self-justification. Justification had been exhausting. Explaining to yourself why now was not the right time consumed energy that could have been used to act. Letting go of that explanation frees attention. Freed attention deepens experience. Work feels more contained. Relationships feel more present. Even rest feels more complete. Completeness here does not mean closure. It means engagement without mental escape. When the mind is not elsewhere, moments are allowed to finish themselves. This finishing reduces carryover. Less emotional residue is dragged from one day to the next. The future feels lighter because it is not tasked with correcting the past. Correction is replaced by continuation. Each day offers another chance to engage. Not to make up for anything, but to keep participating. Participation changes how endings are experienced. When something concludes, it is allowed to end without excessive regret. The time was lived while it was here. This does not eliminate longing. There are still things wished for, paths not taken. Presence allows these feelings to exist without becoming reasons to wait. Waiting loses its central role. It becomes situational rather than habitual. Chosen when it serves care. Released when it replaces living. As this pattern holds, life feels less like a series of preliminaries. The sense of rehearsal fades. What remains is the feeling of being inside your own days. Inside does not mean comfortable. It means involved. Involved enough to feel effort. Involved enough to feel relief when effort ends. The end of the day arrives again. Light dims. Sounds soften. There is no urge to rush ahead mentally. The day has been met. Meeting it does not require approval. It requires presence. And presence, once practiced consistently, no longer feels like something to achieve. It feels like where you are. There is a noticeable quiet that settles in when postponement is no longer doing most of the work. The mind feels less crowded. Not empty, but less congested. Fewer things are being carried forward without reason. Fewer conversations are happening only in imagination. This quiet does not arrive all at once. It appears in brief stretches. A moment of sitting without reaching for distraction. A task addressed sooner than expected. A feeling acknowledged without immediately being explained away. Each moment leaves behind a small trace of relief. Relief does not come from finishing everything. It comes from knowing that what mattered was not deliberately avoided. That attention was given where it could be given. That effort was offered honestly, even if incompletely. Incomplete effort used to feel like failure. Now it feels human. There is room for progress that does not resolve everything. Room for attempts that clarify rather than conclude. Clarity emerges through contact. Contact with the work itself. Contact with the emotional response it brings up. Contact with the limits that appear along the way. These limits are no longer treated as reasons to stop. They are treated as information. Information changes how decisions are made. Instead of waiting for an ideal moment, choices are made in relation to what is actually available. Available time. Available energy. Available attention. This realism prevents unnecessary strain. Strain had often come from asking too much of the future. Expecting later to fix what was avoided now. Expecting clarity to arrive without engagement. As that expectation loosens, effort becomes more proportional. Proportional effort feels sustainable. It avoids extremes. There is less overcommitment followed by withdrawal. More steady participation across time. Participation does not mean constant activity. It includes rest that is taken deliberately. Rest that acknowledges fatigue without turning into escape. When rest is honest, it restores rather than delays. Delay and rest can look similar from the outside. The difference lies in intention. Rest has an end. Delay dissolves boundaries. Presence makes that distinction easier to sense. Sensing becomes an important skill. The body often registers misalignment before the mind names it. A tightening when something is being avoided. A release when something is addressed directly. Paying attention to these signals guides timing more reliably than rules. Rules had once promised safety. If the right sequence could be followed, life would unfold correctly. Experience teaches otherwise. Life unfolds through responsiveness, not adherence to fixed scripts. Responsiveness allows adjustment without self-blame. When something does not work, the response is not to retreat indefinitely, but to recalibrate. Small changes are made while staying engaged. This staying engaged prevents the buildup of regret. Regret thrives in distance. When life is lived at arm's length, imagination fills the gap with what might have been. Presence shortens that gap. Shortened gaps make memory feel fuller. Looking back, there is less sense of blank stretches where nothing was entered. Even difficult periods carry texture when they were lived rather than postponed. Texture matters. It gives life shape. Without it, time flattens into repetition. With it, even similar days feel distinct. Distinction comes from attention. The way light looks at a certain hour. The particular tone of a conversation. The feeling of finishing something small that mattered. These details do not demand notice. They reward it. Reward here is not excitement. It is coherence. The sense that life is being lived from the inside rather than managed from a distance. Managing had once been the strategy. Keeping life organized enough to avoid discomfort. Presence shifts the strategy from management to participation. Participation accepts discomfort as part of the process. Acceptance does not mean liking everything. It means not arguing endlessly with what is already happening. That argument had drained energy. Letting it go frees capacity for response. Response feels more direct now. Less filtered through fear of outcome. More guided by alignment. Does this action respect what matters? Does this delay serve care? These questions are answered through experience rather than theory. Theory still has its place. Reflection remains valuable. But reflection that does not return to action stalls growth. Action, even tentative, completes the cycle. Completing cycles reduces mental noise. There are fewer unresolved intentions echoing in the background. Attention feels more available. The mind rests more easily when it is not constantly negotiating with later. Negotiation had once been constant. Promises to start soon. Reasons why now was not ideal. These conversations quiet down as trust in responsiveness grows. Trust is built through follow-through. Not flawless follow-through, but honest effort repeated over time. Each instance reinforces the sense that life will be met rather than deferred. As this trust settles, fear changes shape. It does not disappear. It becomes less persuasive. Fear no longer determines timing by default. It is considered, weighed, and often carried alongside action. Carrying fear while acting builds resilience. Not resilience defined by toughness, but by capacity. The capacity to stay present even when things feel uncertain. Uncertainty is no longer treated as a problem to solve before living. It is treated as the condition within which living happens. Accepting this reduces internal resistance. Resistance fades into something quieter. Acknowledgement replaces argument. Effort replaces avoidance. The day continues in its ordinary way. Responsibilities remain. The world does not change pace. The change is internal and cumulative. By evening, there is less sense of unfinished business pressing for attention. Not because everything was addressed, but because what mattered most was not ignored. This difference is subtle but profound. It shapes how rest is entered. How sleep arrives. How the next day begins. The cycle continues. Not perfectly. Not without drift. But with a growing ease in returning. Returning to presence no longer feels like effortful correction. It feels like coming back to where you already are. At a certain point, the sense of having fallen behind begins to dissolve. Not because everything has been addressed, but because the idea of catching up no longer defines how time is experienced. Days stop feeling like obstacles between you and some future version of yourself. They feel like the place where life is already happening. This change is subtle. It does not announce itself with relief or certainty. It shows up as a quieter internal climate. Fewer background calculations about how time should be used. Less pressure to justify each choice by what it will lead to later. Later still exists, but it has lost its authority. It is no longer treated as a destination where clarity and permission finally arrive. It is understood as an extension of present patterns rather than a correction for them. Patterns become easier to notice now. The way attention drifts when something feels uncertain. The way energy lifts when effort is aligned. The way resistance tightens when something meaningful is being avoided. These signals are familiar. They no longer require interpretation. They guide behavior quietly. Guidance replaces motivation. Motivation had been unpredictable. Some days it appeared easily. Other days it did not arrive at all. Waiting for it had kept life suspended. Guidance, by contrast, is always present. It emerges from attention. Attention, when given consistently, changes the shape of effort. Effort becomes less dramatic. Less all or nothing. It is offered in smaller, steadier amounts. This steadiness prevents burnout and reduces the urge to disappear into delay. Disappearing had once been tempting. It offered distance from uncertainty. But distance also dulled experience. Presence restores texture. Even when days are repetitive, they no longer blur together completely. Texture lives in small distinctions. The difference between beginning something reluctantly and beginning it with attention. The difference between resting as escape and resting as care. These distinctions are felt rather than analyzed. Feeling replaces overthinking. Decisions are made with less internal debate. Not because everything is clear, but because clarity is no longer required in advance. Action itself provides feedback. Feedback keeps life responsive. When something does not fit, it is adjusted sooner. When energy dips, pace is reduced without turning into avoidance. When fear appears, it is acknowledged without granting it total control. Control had once been the quiet promise of waiting. If things could be delayed long enough, they might become manageable. Experience proves otherwise. Management improves through participation, not postponement. Participation does not require courage in the dramatic sense. It requires steadiness. Returning to what matters even when enthusiasm fades. Staying present when the moment feels ordinary or uncomfortable. Ordinary moments now carry more weight. Not because they are romanticized, but because they are recognized as the substance of life. Waiting for extraordinary conditions to begin living no longer makes sense. This recognition softens ambition. Ambition remains, but it is grounded. It no longer demands that the present be sacrificed for a future payoff. Growth is allowed to occur alongside living, not instead of it. Living alongside growth feels humane. It allows for effort and for error. It allows learning to happen in real time rather than in theory. Waiting had postponed learning indefinitely. Learning through experience builds confidence of a particular kind. Not confidence in success, but confidence in responsiveness. The belief that whatever arises can be met without needing to retreat. Retreat had once felt safer than engagement. Now it feels limiting. Engaging with difficulty, even imperfectly, offers more stability than distance ever did. Stability does not mean predictability. Circumstances still change. Plans still shift. What remains stable is the orientation toward presence. The willingness to stay with what is happening rather than negotiating endlessly with what might happen later. Negotiation had consumed enormous energy. Internal arguments about timing. Justifications for delay. Promises to begin soon. As these fade, attention becomes available. Available attention deepens experience. Work feels more contained. Relationships feel more present. Even solitude feels richer when it is not filled with avoidance. Avoidance leaves a particular residue. A sense of being partially absent. Presence removes that residue. It allows moments to complete themselves. Completion here does not mean resolution. It means engagement without mental escape. When attention stays, moments are allowed to end naturally. Natural endings make rest easier. Sleep arrives with less mental replay. The body recognizes when effort has been honest. Honesty becomes the quiet measure. Not productivity. Not achievement. Honesty. Whether life was met where it appeared. This measure is forgiving. It allows for missteps. It invites return rather than judgment. Returning becomes easier when there is no need to punish drifting. Drifting still happens. Attention wanders. Old habits resurface. What changes is the speed of return. Presence is reclaimed more quickly, with less drama. Less drama makes living feel lighter. Not easier, but less burdened by internal conflict. Energy is spent on life itself rather than on resisting it. Resistance had once defined many days. Arguing with what was required. Wishing the moment were different. Presence ends that argument. Ending the argument does not mean liking everything. It means accepting what is here enough to respond honestly. Response replaces reaction. Choices feel cleaner. There is less urgency to escape forward. The present is allowed to stand on its own. Standing with the present brings a sense of sufficiency. Not because everything is enough, but because you are enough to meet it. Meeting it does not require perfection. It requires willingness. Willingness to begin without certainty. Willingness to stay when discomfort appears. Willingness to let the day be what it is. As evening settles again, the day does not ask to be evaluated. It only reflects whether it was entered. The reflection is quiet. The answer is imperfect. And still, something essential has been maintained. Life has not been postponed. There is a steadiness that develops when presence is no longer treated as a task to complete. It settles in gradually, like a rhythm the body remembers even when attention wanders. Life does not feel solved. It feels held. Held does not mean controlled. It means met with enough care to keep moving. Days still vary. Some carry ease. Others arrive dense and demanding. What no longer varies as much is the willingness to enter them without waiting for permission. Permission had once been sought from circumstances. From mood. From confidence. Now it is assumed through action. Beginning happens before certainty. Staying happens before comfort. This order feels natural now, even when it is not easy. Ease appears unexpectedly in this order. Not the ease of effortlessness, but the ease of congruence. Effort lines up with intention. Attention rests where it is used. Internal friction reduces. Friction had once been constant. The push and pull between now and later. The feeling of living slightly ahead of yourself or behind yourself. Presence narrows that gap. You are more often where you are. Being where you are changes how time is felt. Hours no longer feel like containers to fill or obstacles to clear. They feel like spaces to inhabit. Even difficult hours carry shape when they are entered fully. Entering difficulty early prevents it from expanding. What is met while it is small remains workable. Waiting had allowed discomfort to grow abstract and overwhelming. Engagement returns it to human scale. Human scale matters. It keeps life approachable. It prevents the future from becoming a burden. When tasks, conversations, and decisions are addressed close to when they arise, they do not accumulate into something heavier than necessary. Accumulation had once been the silent source of exhaustion. Not the work itself, but the weight of postponed living. As that weight lifts, energy becomes more available. Available energy is spent differently. Less on distraction. Less on justification. More on what feels aligned. This shift does not require discipline. It follows naturally when presence becomes familiar. Familiarity with presence does not eliminate resistance. Resistance still appears. The difference is that it no longer feels like a barrier. It feels like a signal. Something here matters enough to provoke hesitation. Hesitation is treated gently now. It is neither obeyed nor attacked. It is acknowledged and moved alongside. Action proceeds with hesitation present rather than waiting for it to disappear. This way of moving builds trust. Trust in the capacity to handle uncertainty. Trust that mistakes can be adjusted rather than avoided. Trust that life will be met even when it feels unfinished. Unfinished becomes a normal state. Projects remain open. Questions remain unanswered. This no longer creates urgency. It creates continuity. Life is understood as ongoing rather than preparatory. Preparation had once replaced living. Plans multiplied. Research expanded. Readiness was pursued endlessly. Presence reveals when preparation has become a hiding place. Hiding feels different now. It is easier to recognize. It carries a particular tightness. Engagement, even when uncomfortable, carries relief. The body learns this distinction. Learning through the body grounds understanding. It moves inside out of theory and into experience. Experience becomes the reference point. What feels settling is trusted. What feels draining is questioned. Questioning happens without judgment. There is less need to label behaviors as good or bad. The focus shifts to whether something supports engagement or postponement. This simplicity reduces inner conflict. Decisions feel less charged. There is less at stake in any single moment. Life is allowed to be iterative. Iteration supports patience. Progress is no longer expected to be immediate or linear. Small adjustments are valued. Consistency outweighs intensity. Intensity had once fueled short bursts followed by withdrawal. Consistency supports endurance. It allows effort to be offered again tomorrow without resentment. Resentment fades when life is not treated as something owed to the future. When days are allowed to stand on their own, there is less pressure to extract meaning from them. Meaning emerges quietly through participation. Through showing up. Through responding when response is called for. Through resting when rest is needed. Rest feels different now. It is entered without escape. It restores rather than numbs. The body recognizes when rest follows honest effort. Evenings close more cleanly. There is less mental replay. Fewer unfinished conversations echoing. What remains feels proportionate. Proportion brings calm. Not a dramatic calm, but a functional one. The sense that what matters has been addressed enough for now. Enough becomes a useful boundary. Enough effort. Enough attention. Enough for today. This boundary prevents overreach without turning into avoidance. Avoidance had once worn many disguises. Now it stands out more clearly. It is easier to choose otherwise. Choosing otherwise does not require heroics. It requires return. Each time attention drifts into later, it is brought back to now. This return happens more quickly with practice. Practice accumulates. It reshapes orientation. Presence becomes the ground rather than the goal. From this ground, the future is approached differently. Not as a place to escape to, but as a direction unfolding from current choices. The future feels lighter because it is not carrying the weight of deferred living. Deferred living had been heavy. Living in contact feels lighter, even when it is demanding. The difference is participation. Participation restores dignity. There is dignity in meeting your own life. In not postponing yourself. This dignity does not announce itself. It is felt privately. In the steadiness of days. In the reduced urge to run ahead mentally. In the ease of returning when attention wanders. Wandering still happens. It always will. What matters is the return. The return is no longer a struggle. It is a remembering. Remembering where you are. Remembering that life is here. Remembering that now is enough to begin. There comes a moment when the fear of missing out quietly transforms. It no longer centers on opportunities, achievements, or experiences that might be lost. It centers on something simpler. The fear of not being present for the life that is already happening. This shift does not arrive through logic. It arrives through familiarity. Through enough days lived with attention that absence begins to feel noticeable. Not dramatic absence, but the subtle kind. The kind that leaves moments thinner than they need to be. Presence has weight now. It is felt in its absence as much as in its presence. When attention drifts too far into planning or anticipation, there is a gentle sense of disconnection. Not guilt. Just awareness. A cue to return. Returning feels uncomplicated. There is no need to reset the day or correct everything that came before. Attention is simply brought back to what is in front of you. A sentence being read. A task halfway done. A person waiting for a response. Responsiveness has become instinctive. The lag between noticing and acting shortens. Life feels less buffered. Less delayed by internal processing. More immediate. Immediacy does not mean impulsiveness. It means reducing unnecessary distance. Responding when response is needed instead of holding everything at arm's length for evaluation. Evaluation had once dominated. Every action weighed for future impact. Every decision filtered through imagined outcomes. That mental load eases. Not because outcomes no longer matter, but because they no longer decide whether living can occur. Living is recognized as happening regardless of outcomes. This recognition removes a hidden condition that once governed engagement. The condition that things must go well to justify effort. Effort is no longer conditional. It is offered because it belongs to the moment, not because it guarantees a result. This frees action from constant performance pressure. Performance pressure had turned many moments into auditions. Waiting was the safer option. Presence replaces auditioning with participation. Participation feels steadier. It allows for mistakes without collapse. When something does not work, the response is adjustment rather than retreat. Learning continues. Learning feels embodied now. Less about insight and more about familiarity. Familiarity with how attention moves. Familiarity with what avoidance feels like. Familiarity with the relief that follows honest engagement. Relief does not come from finishing everything. It comes from integrity. From knowing that effort was offered where it mattered. That something meaningful was not indefinitely postponed. Integrity builds self-trust. Not the abstract kind, but practical trust. Trust that you will show up again. Trust that you will notice when you drift. Trust that you will return. This trust reduces internal supervision. There is less need to monitor yourself constantly. Life flows with fewer checkpoints. Attention moves more freely. Freedom here is not the absence of responsibility. It is the absence of unnecessary restraint. The restraint that came from believing life must be optimized before it could be lived. Optimizing had once seemed responsible. In practice, it often delayed engagement. Presence reveals when refinement is helpful and when it is simply postponement in disguise. Disguises are harder to maintain now. Awareness sees through them quickly. Excuses feel thin. Justifications lose their grip. This does not create harshness. It creates simplicity. When something matters, it is met. When it does not, it is released without drama. Drama fades when life is entered consistently. There is less build-up. Less waiting for the right emotional moment. Action is integrated into ordinary days. Ordinary days carry more dignity now. They are no longer treated as placeholders. Each one holds the possibility of participation. Participation does not require energy to be high. It adapts to capacity. On low-energy days, it looks like small honesty. On fuller days, it looks like sustained effort. Both count. Counting shifts from quantity to quality. How something is done matters more than how much is done. Attention becomes the measure. This measure is forgiving. It allows days to be uneven without being dismissed. It invites return rather than judgment. Judgment had once fueled avoidance. Fear of doing it wrong led to doing nothing. Presence dissolves that cycle. Doing something imperfectly becomes preferable to waiting perfectly. Perfection loses its appeal. Not because standards disappear, but because perfection is no longer confused with worth. Worth is experienced through engagement. Engagement keeps life grounded. It prevents the future from becoming an abstract ideal. The future is shaped quietly through present choices. Shaping happens whether it is acknowledged or not. Presence simply allows it to happen consciously. Waiting leaves it to chance. Chance had once been trusted to deliver clarity. Experience teaches otherwise. Clarity grows through interaction. Through trying. Through adjusting. Adjustment feels natural now. There is less attachment to how things should unfold. Plans shift without signaling failure. Change is met without excessive resistance. Resistance, when it appears, is brief. It is noticed. It is felt. It is often softened through attention alone. Attention has become the most reliable resource. It cannot be stockpiled. It must be offered where you are. When it is, life responds. Response does not mean reward. It means contact. Contact grounds experience. It prevents the sense of floating past your own life. Floating had once been common. Days passed with little impression. Now they leave traces. Not dramatic memories, but a sense of having been there. Being there changes everything quietly. Time feels inhabited rather than endured. Life feels closer, not because it is easier, but because it is met. As another day moves toward its end, there is no urge to rush ahead mentally. The day is allowed to close as it is. What mattered was met. What was not can be returned to. Return is always possible. That knowledge brings ease. There is no final chance being missed. Life continues to offer moments. And now, they are recognized when they arrive. Toward the end of this arc, there is no sense of arrival in the dramatic sense. Nothing resolves cleanly. Nothing announces completion. Instead, there is a quiet settling, as though something unnecessary has finally been put down. Life continues exactly as it did before. Days still arrive unevenly. Some feel full. Others feel thin. Responsibilities remain. Uncertainty remains. What has changed is not the structure of life, but the posture toward it. Waiting is no longer the place where energy goes by default. When it appears, it is recognized quickly. It is questioned gently. Sometimes it is kept. Often it is released. Either way, it is chosen rather than assumed. This choice brings a particular calm. Not a calm that eliminates difficulty, but one that removes unnecessary resistance. The present moment is no longer something to argue with. It is something to meet. Meeting does not require intensity. It requires availability. Being available to the task at hand. To the person in front of you. To the feeling that has been pushed aside. Availability does not demand perfection. It demands honesty. Honesty, over time, simplifies everything. There is less mental rearranging. Less internal bargaining. Less explaining why now is not the right time. When something matters, it is approached. When rest is needed, it is taken. This balance is not static. It shifts with seasons, energy, and circumstance. What remains steady is the refusal to postpone life indefinitely. The present is allowed to count, even when it is ordinary. Ordinary moments have proven themselves to be enough. Not exciting, not impressive, but sufficient. They carry the weight of living when they are entered fully. Looking back, there is no single turning point to point to. No moment where everything changed. The change is cumulative. Built from many small decisions to begin rather than wait, to stay rather than escape. These decisions do not feel heroic in memory. They feel natural. They belong to the texture of days rather than to a narrative of transformation. Transformation, it turns out, does not always feel transformative. It feels like alignment. Like no longer standing at a distance from your own time. Time continues to move forward, indifferent as ever. The difference is subtle but decisive. It is no longer something to get through on the way to life. It is life. As the day settles into evening once more, there is no need to prepare for some future moment when living will finally feel permitted. Permission is assumed. It is taken in the act of attention itself. The room grows quiet. Light fades. The day ends without commentary. Nothing asks to be improved in retrospect. Nothing needs to be defended. What remains is a sense of having been present for your own life. Not constantly. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to know that waiting is no longer the strategy. Enough to know that life does not begin later. It has been here all along.